You feel the dry, hot dust of California or some western frontier territory rising and clinging to your lungs, a harshness that seems to corrode the last layer of skin you still consider innocent. It is the late 1840s or early 1850s, a time of worldwide migration and golden promises that rarely materialize for the vulnerable. You can barely remember the quietude, for since your arrival, everything is a noise of rapid and disordered growth. You are Minie, and you are not white. You are one of the people of color who, in this new American order, are immediately defined as inferior, placed on the margins of a society that builds itself upon a class structure of white supremacy. You were born on a low social rung, perhaps as a former mission Indian or from a poor family. Your heritage or your poverty places you at the bottom of this new racial and economic hierarchy. You observe the tide of men who arrived in this new state. California's population jumped to well over 100,000 in 1850, and the scarcity of women, an imbalance that, paradoxically, brings you no security, but rather transforms you into a rare artifact under a predatory gaze. You breathe the dust that mixes with the acrid smell of masculine sweat and cheap alcohol that flows incessantly. The day's temperature, relentless, makes even shade seem like a luxury good. You remember your innocence, that time before understanding that, in the dynamic and constantly expanding system called capitalism, everything is commodified to increase capital. Even human relations become an aspect of the market. You sought respectable work, a form of livelihood that would allow you and your family, if there still is one, to belong to the community that the new American rulers are creating. But you find only closed doors, or low status and isolating occupations common to women on the frontier, like seamstress or domestic worker. Respectable work confines and isolates you, limiting your scope of life outside the home. You know that the frontier promised opportunity, but, for you, that promise is an exhausting farce. The effort required in domestic work and the exclusion from economic rights, such as property rights or earnings, reinforce your powerlessness. You feel the cold of necessity, hunger, perhaps, or the fear of being destitute. What surrounds you is a mentality of capital accumulation, characterized by a relentless disposition to reduce people to profitable or not profitable. The society around you says, if you are lazy or incapable of hard and real work, the faster the useless being goes, the better. You remember the accounts of other women, especially indigenous ones, who were pushed to society's margins, facing destruction and land dispossession. Violence in this context becomes law, and racialized victims are left without legal recourse, deprived of civil rights, security, and even the right to have a family, unless a powerful white man acts as protector. You feel this vulnerability even in the way men look at you on the street, like an available commodity. The morning sun, still low, strikes the side of a rough wooden construction. That's where the town really happens. You hear loud laughter and the continuous noise of gambling drums, which ironically announced games of chance even among Indians. Gambling, drinking, and sexual commerce are intrinsic parts of frontier life, and your profession, though stigmatized, will exist as a safety valve in a world dominated by transient men. You breathe deeply, and the pain in your stomach tightens. It's not hunger, but the fear of not being able to transform the filth of your life into something sustainable. The myth of easy wealth and social ascension, the kind that high-status prostitutes supposedly achieved, is the only mirage you have left. The door of the shack where you live as a favor is almost shattered. Your innocence is not lost, but exhausted by privation and the constant threat of exploitation. You think of the figure of Minnie Wallace Walkup, a Creole who used beauty to prosper and climb the social ladder through marriage. Concubinage, or the fast life, the path you're about to take, is seen by historians as a path to respectable financial autonomy or marriage to a rich client, although evidence suggests this was a path achieved by few before they died. However, for the desperate innocent, the myth is more potent than reality. You take the first step toward the center of the commotion, where the noise is most intense, where the odor of whiskey and the tinkling of gold coins mix. You feel the weight of your decision, a mixture of fleeting hope and incipient cynicism. You know you are becoming a piece in a larger game, a high-stakes game. This new path, though infamous, offers you a weapon that virtue did not. the power of attraction in an environment of female scarcity. The morning light now spreads, and you move into the shadow of the alleys leading to gambling halls and hurdy-gurdy houses. This will be your new territory. You abandon naive hope for a calculated determination, Minie's determination to survive. You breathe, and the street air is laden with smoke and illicit opportunities. You are leaving the innocent behind, but you carry with you the necessity that forced you to go. You now walk toward what is known as a hell on wheels, a transient settlement filled with gambling houses, dance halls, and brothels. The only alternative was misery, and morality, you realize, is a luxury only dominant whites can afford. The explorer has not yet fully emerged, but the innocent has already accepted the call of the crossing. Your heart beats no longer with the pain of loss, but with the accelerated beat of dangerous anticipation. You are about to plunge into a world where the only law is that of greed and survival, a world where card games and the selling of oneself are the strongest currencies. The promise of ascension, however illusory and dangerous, is what moves you. From now on, the world will be a map to be explored, and you will be your only guide. The call is clear. You must go and explore the frontier, the thin line between civilization and savagery, to create your own destiny. The dawn has ended. It's time to depart. You walk on the hardened mud of the main street where chaos is the only predictable rule. The air now smells not only of dust and sweat, but of sawed wood, cheap tobacco, and a persistent trail of open sewage that the rapid civilization, hastened by the gold rush, has not yet managed to tame. The town is a hell on wheels, a transient settlement that arose to serve the wave of men, miners, merchants, adventurers, who came west. You feel the stares. They are not just stares of desire, but of possession, of evaluation. In this world of unbalanced proportions, where the number of men dramatically exceeds that of women, you immediately become a rare artifact, a luxury piece in a brutal market. The explorer in you is not looking for hidden treasures in mountains, but is mapping the immediate dangers in the face of each man who passes, cataloguing greed and opportunity. You breathe deeply, and with each inhalation, the fragility of your position as a person of color and your humble origin become sharper. You know that, in this new social structure imposed by the new American rulers, all whites are ranked above all people of color, and indigenous people, or people with native heritage like yours, are on the lowest rung. Violence is, in practice, the law for people like you, and the chance of recourse is almost nil, unless a powerful white man decides to be your protector. You remember that innocence is not a shield, it's a burden. The only way to survive is to become necessary, profitable. Your feet take you to the districts where the music is loudest and incessant. This is where trade, in its most explicit form, flourishes. The gambling halls, with their dance houses and brothels, are the epicenter of social life. You notice that gambling, like faro or poker, and drinking are central, accepted and tolerated activities, where large sums of money are lost and won in hours. You walk toward a crib, a small prostitution room, or a dance hall where girls entertain clients. The smell of cheap perfume and weak disinfectant tries and fails to cover the odor of opium and bodies. This is the economy of transience, where the population consists mainly of young, single men who don't remain in one place for long, and who maintain a trade that prevents the growth of common morality or stable social structures. You feel the need to harden your expression. Here, vulnerability attracts exploitation faster. You remember your first night or the first days, the confusion, the rapid succession of faces, the touch that is not affection but a transaction. The frontier culture, geared toward capital accumulation, demands that you become an item in the market. Prostitution, or the fast life, is a dangerous route, but one that offers temporary financial autonomy, something unattainable in respectable occupations that would confine and isolate you even more. You breathe, a calculated movement, while observing the other women. They are your new tribe, your companions in risk. Some seem tired, others carry a cynicism as sharp as a razor. Many came west seeking opportunities, but for most, social mobility through marriage to rich clients is a myth rarely achieved before death. You feel the fabric of your dress, probably cheap but flashy, designed to attract looks. Your appearance is your tool, your only negotiating currency. You are not Minie, the innocent, Now you are Minie, the explorer, learning to deal with the unwritten rules of this new territory. You remember that money is the only thing that speaks truth in this town. Gold coins and stacks of bills are the measure of your freedom, not the Victorian morality that is reserved for the wives of the men who visit you. You quickly learn the terms: bucking the tiger, hurdy-gurdy girl, and the importance of maintaining discretion about your earnings. The explorer in you absorbs the hierarchy. There are the crib girls, confined to small shacks, and the fancy women who work in the more opulent saloons, like El Dorado or Bella Union, where luxury is displayed with high ceilings, chandeliers, and art. You aspire to climb this ladder, away from the stench of the cribs. You feel the pressure of time, the fleetingness of your youth and attractiveness. Life on the frontier is hard, women's work is exhausting, and health is a constant risk. The explorer knows she must accumulate quickly before luck or the body fails. You hear the sounds of the night, the clamor of a gambler losing everything at faro, the creak of the roulette wheel, and underlying everything, the hubbub of drunken men, the sound that marks your new home. You remember what it's like to be treated as a human being. Here, you are a commodity. You observe the men who arrive: dirty miners with gold dust, suited lawyers, professional gamblers elegantly dressed in silk and velvet. You study their body language, the level of intoxication, the depth of their poke. You breathe, and this air, though impure, is the air of calculated opportunity. Your survival now depends on your cunning. You need to transform this brutal exposure into financial security, at least for a while. You feel a pang of anxiety upon seeing a bottle of medicine or a man coughing. You know that venereal disease was an ever-present risk on the frontier. Treatments were dangerous and stigmatizing, involving mercury or arsenic. The fear of syphilis or other diseases, which could end your career and your life, is an invisible map of danger you must constantly consult. The explorer learns the language of cards, watching the dealers in the saloons. Games of chance are your school. You move through the crowd like a creature learning to swim in turbulent waters, maintaining control of your emotions and clarity about your objective, to survive and ascend. You walk to the counter where the whiskey bottles are lined up. The bartender, a robust man, smiles with disinterest. You order a drink and observe the room, feeling, for the first time, almost invisible in your new visibility. You remember there is no going back to the innocent's role. The door has closed. You are now in the heart of the frontier capitalist system, a place where the value of life is measured in profit, and you are determined not to be jettisoned as an unprofitable object. The promise of ascension, the myth of marrying a rich man like Minnie Wallace Walkup, the Creole who used beauty to gain social status, or the chance to leave with a handful of gold, is your compass. It's a risky exploration where each day is a gamble. The explorer is ready to chart your path, not just as Minie, the concubine, but as Minie, the negotiator of destiny, ascending from the margins to center stage of the game. You know the next step is to find a place that gives you more status and control. It's time to leave the shadow and begin the crossing. You feel a new layer of skin, thicker, more resistant to touch and stares. Fear has given way to calculated ambition. You are no longer just exploring, you are conquering. The frontier, with its overwhelmingly male population, has given you a weapon, rarity. You are determined to transform it into economic power. You breathe cleaner air now, no longer the suffocating vapor of the cribs, but the expensive perfume and smell of premium tobacco of the finer saloons. You have ascended, perhaps from a shack in San Francisco to an elegant saloon in the Comstock Lode, Nevada, or in Deadwood, where gambling is the center of social life. You remember that, in the beginning, prostitution was often described as an individual choice or a sign of personal maladjustment, a framing that blames the victim, ignoring the importance of social structure in shaping people's lives. You know that the social structure of Gold Rush, California, was a hierarchy of white supremacy, where people of color were seen as inferior, and violence and exclusion were the rule, unless there was a powerful white protector. You feel, however, the temporary freedom that money buys you. The hero seeks control of a destiny. You move from the lowest positions to become a fancy woman, or perhaps a card dealer like Donna Tulis in New Mexico, who became very wealthy and played Monte for the house. You display your wealth. Expensive dresses, rings on your fingers, and gold chains around your neck. You breathe, and the sound of your own heels on the saloon carpet is music, no longer the noise of mud. The frontier culture, geared toward capital accumulation, imposes conduct norms where human relations become largely an aspect of the market. And you are playing the market game better than most women. You walk among the faro, roulette, and poker tables. Faro, the national banking game of the 19th century, is the heart of greed. The hero must master this high-risk environment. You observe the players, the dirty miners and elegantly dressed professional gamblers, measuring their gold pouches and their confidence. You remember your struggle to be seen as something more than a commodity. In the West, while some historical narratives speak of strong and empowered women, most women felt confined to domesticity and isolation. For you, sexual commerce offered a risky but higher status path than respectable occupations, such as seamstress or domestic worker. You feel the adrenaline of high-level gambling. You learn the language of betting, far out, bucking the tiger. The explorer in you quickly learned cunning. You know that some professional gamblers were admired for their honesty and dedication to honor, but that the frontier was also full of cheaters who used cold decks or thimble rig. The hero in Minie positions herself as an honest gambler, or at least as someone who gives a decent chance to win. You pride yourself on not being a tin-horn cheat. You breathe the smell of silk smoke and the promise of capital. Ambition is at its peak. You seek high-stakes romance. You remember the story of Minnie Wallace Walkup, the Creole who used beauty to prosper and climb the social scale and marry a rich man. This is the myth of mobility in prostitution. The idea that the fast life is a path to respectable financial autonomy or marriage to a rich client. You allow yourself to feed this illusion, even knowing that evidence suggests few prostitutes left the criminal community before they died. You walk on the dance floor of a hurdy-gurdy house where the availability of private rooms is part of the appeal. You get involved with a client. He is rich, perhaps a lucky miner or an elegant gambler. This is a romance framed in transaction. You feel constant tension. You know that frontier life is characterized by uncontrolled violence against people of color. Violence was common in gambling halls, and death by a quick trigger was routine. You might witness a confrontation like the murder of John Peters by Mike Shaw in Anton Chicot, or the fight over jealousy involving Kitty Leroy in Deadwood. You breathe, maintaining calm, teaching yourself to be impassive. It's the hero in action, surviving in an environment where violence in practice became law. You remember your status as heroine in your own world. A small portion of frontier women reached the top of the socio-economic ladder in ways that would not be possible elsewhere. You are part of that minority, but this exposes you to even greater risks. You feel that your relationship, initially promising, begins to deteriorate. Perhaps the rich miner reveals himself to be an exploiter, like Colonel McHarney, who ran Madame Mustache's establishment, or love is frustrated by instability and violence, like the case of Ann Masters and John Peters. You see the mirror in your rented room, elegant but temporary. You see a girl of status but of uncertain destiny. Social ascension, success in the fast life, is an alchemy that tries to transform your social filth into gold. But the cost is high, and the foundation is fragile. You walk, and the pain in your body is not just from fatigue, but the first sign that the fast life is taking its toll. Perhaps a medicine for blood diseases, like the Samaritan root and herb juice advertised in newspapers, is a subtle sign. You breathe. The euphoria of victory in gambling and wealth fades. You are now on the front line of the battle between greed, gold and morality, disease and stigma. The saloon's brilliance suddenly seems excessive. The hero in Minie achieved temporary victory, but the crossing is about to end. The world, with its hypocrisy and inevitable risks, is about to reveal the shadow. Darkness awaits. It's the hour when the silent fear of disease surpasses the noise of coins. You feel the saloon air, which before seemed luxurious, become heavy and stagnant. The expensive perfume you use to mask the house's smells now seems just a thin veil over something rotten. You reached a point of social ascension, moving from the most degraded areas to become a fancy woman. But the price of this status is being charged not in gold, but in flesh and isolation. You breathe, and breathing is shallow. There is a sharp, persistent pain, which began subtly and now refuses to be ignored. It's the fear that the explorer had mapped, the ever-present risk of venereal disease that was a common reality on the frontier. You remember that, for women who sold sexual favors, finding a doctor willing to treat them was a difficult task. The moral stigma, which went from silent recognition to total antipathy and disgrace as civilization organized itself and Eastern Puritan moralism arrived in the West, means you must suffer in silence. You feel your body betray you. It's syphilis, perhaps, the disease that, according to historical accounts, was widely spread and often treated with dangerous substances. You may have seen advertisements for cures like the Samaritan root and herb juice, which promised to be a positive cure for all blood and skin diseases, including syphilis. You know these treatments were a gamble with the potential to be dangerous, involving arsenic or mercury. You walk slowly, watching the gaming table. Yesterday's hero, determined to conquer financial autonomy, now faces an enemy that cannot be defeated with cunning or a flush in hand. You remember the romance. The man, the rich miner or charming gambler with whom you got involved, was not your savior. He was your shadow. The relationship, which began with the promise of an ascension to respectability, the myth of marrying a rich client and becoming a pillar of elite society, now falls apart. You realize that this mobility, in fact, was a myth rarely achieved before death. You feel the betrayal. Your lover, perhaps like James Walkup, who frequented brothels regularly and contracted severe syphilis, betrayed you. Or perhaps he exploited you, as was common for prostitutes' lovers. Either he was financially independent and used social and economic power to dominate you, or more often, he lived off your earnings. His touch now seems impure and painful to you. You breathe, and the smell of whiskey and strong cigars intensifies the nausea. You wonder if your disease was the cause of the relationship's collapse, or if his disease was transmitted to you. In a world where informal marriage was uncommon for women of your profession, even with rich men, your vulnerability was always extreme. You remember the story of Kitty Leroy, who in Deadwood was in a status quo relationship with Curly, one of the richest and most respected men in town, despite her profession. Even this unofficial union ended in tragedy. When Curly learned she was with another lover, he rushed from Denver, challenged the usurper, and when refused, shot and killed Kitty before taking his own life. Violence, jealousy, and death haunted these high-stakes romances. You feel loneliness deepen. Isolation, both from society at large and from extended family, was a characteristic of frontier life. You cannot reconstitute that network of female friendships that sustained life at home. You walk to the window, watching the reflection of gaslight on the glass. The city, which was once a promise of wealth and adventure, now seems like a purgatory between savagery and civilization, a transient culture where violence in practice became law for people of color and legal recourse was null. You remember that. Even the little affection or esteem that some clients demonstrated was, in the end, superficial. You remember the diary of a former client about little Ida, a board who killed herself. Ida Vernon was her name. A man was sleeping with her and found her cold in the morning. Rest in peace, Ida. She was her own worst enemy. The indifference to her death, despite the "I used to," echoes the lack of deep and lasting mutual esteem that was mitigated by economic exchange and the difference in social power. You breathe, and the effort brings a new wave of pain. The shadow archetype is not just the disease, but the acceptance of your mortality and the reality of your exploitation. The illusion that sexual commerce was an alchemy to transform filth into gold has crumbled. You feel the fragility of your body, the same fragility that condemned many other frontier women. The reality of the prostitute's life, marked by fatigue, isolation, and diseases, contrasts with the myths of fantastic material benefits. You walk to your room, a refuge of temporary luxury. You look at the rings on your fingers, the silk, the gold you conquered. Now they seem like a burden. They cannot buy the cure or true love. You remember that the laws of Eastern hypocritical morality, brought west by the new settlers, often guided by American evangelism and Victorian prudence, see you as a social disease that needs to be eliminated or confined. You are no longer a person, but an entity of regulated morality. You breathe, and the darkness of the room offers relief from the intense and judging light of the saloon. The fear is palpable, but it's a cold and crushing fear, not the sharp fear of violence. It's the recognition that if you die, your death will be noted, but your life will be summarized as that of a woman of easy virtue who, despite acts of kindness and charity, was nothing more than a concubine. The explorer is exhausted. The hero has been wounded. Now, the shadow dominates, forcing you to face the brutal truth of your journey. The only possible salvation now does not lie in the fight, but in understanding. The next stage will be the search for meaning. Minie's need to transform from victim to observer. It's the painful transition to wisdom. You feel the dense, cold morning air on the frontier, but it doesn't have the invigorating freshness it used to promise in the explorer's time. Now it's a reminder of the cold that has settled in your bones, a consequence of your body fighting a disease that mercury and arsenic, the dangerous treatments widely advertised as cures for blood and skin diseases, failed to eradicate. You breathe, and the metallic and slightly acrid smell of the medicine, perhaps the dangerous Samaritan root and herb juice that promised to be a positive cure for syphilis, hovers in your room. The disease forced your introspection. The hero who fought to accumulate wealth and status is tired. Now the sage takes over, using physical pain and emotional betrayal as lenses to understand the world. You understand that your journey was not a story of individual ascension, but a manifestation of the relentless social structure that swept the West. The myth of mobility, the belief that the fast life was a path to respectable financial autonomy or marriage to a rich client and pillar of elite society, crumbles around you, like the rotting wooden shacks of the crib you left behind. You remember the other women, the few who managed to prosper. You realize that the common focus on the fantastic material benefits of a small elite of prostitutes is an intentional and unintentional distortion that denies the victimization of the majority, transforming oppression into an illusory opportunity. You feel that the real tragedy is that you were conditioned to see your own exploitation as a path to profit. You rose, yes, but only enough so that the fall would be more dramatic. In a dynamic and expanding system called capitalism, where everything is commodified to increase capital, even your human relations became largely an aspect of the market. You understand with icy clarity that your presence and that of other easy women served a profound structural purpose for the new American society. Prostitution was seen as a necessary safety valve, protecting respectable wives who were confined and isolated in domestic work. The sage sees the hypocrisy, the regulated morality of the East, which arrived in the West along with the railroad tracks and American evangelism. They condemn you, but depend on your sin to keep their purity intact. You walk to the mirror. The image that returns is no longer that of Minie, the seductive and ambitious hero, but rather that of a woman with profound melancholy and philosophical acceptance. Your heritage as a person of color and the low rung you occupied in the dual structure of race and class made violence in practice the law for you, limiting any recourse. You know that your ascension was a temporary and fragile exception. You rise above judgment, Minie, by redefining virtue on your own terms. Kindness here is not a luxury, but an act of silent rebellion. You remember other women who, despite the infamy of the profession, were known for their acts of kindness and charity. You feel the need to leave a legacy of purpose. If you cannot cure yourself from the world, you can heal the wounds of the marginalized. You begin to perform small acts of benevolence, perhaps paying for the treatment of a younger crib companion who has no funds. Or perhaps help an indigenous woman escape the slavery by sale system, as in Los Angeles, where slaves were sold 52 times a year, to which social exclusion pushed her. You breathe, and with each exhalation you release a part of the illusion. The attempt to transform filth into gold, alchemy, failed, but the transformation of experience into wisdom is the true treasure. You understand the role of your last lover, the hero of Chapter 3, not as a malignant individual, but as an artifact of the market. A man whose profound and lasting mutual esteem was mitigated by economic exchange and the overwhelming difference in social power. You remember the violence that was a constant shadow on the frontier. A conflict arises now not from passion but from moral necessity. The sage must confront the system that created it. You walk to the center of the saloon one last time, not to play but to observe. You see a rich client, who visited you and spoke to you of Victorian prudence and morality, but who is now involved in a dishonest transaction, perhaps exploiting a newly arrived young woman, a girl of even lower status, possibly indigenous or Chinese, who occupied the lowest positions in the prostitution hierarchy. You feel your anger convert into precise words. You expose the man, not with hysteria, but with the factual clarity of the sage. You quote, in a low voice, the rules of the game he betrays, and the rules of morality he pretends to follow. You demonstrate that honesty is not just a virtue, but a tool to expose dominant hypocrisy. You refuse to be silenced by the threat of violence, for the sage has already accepted mortality. You tell him, and the crowd, that the only real disease in town is not in the brothel rooms, but in the greed and exclusion which force people like you to be seen as unprofitable to be jettisoned. You breathe, and the satisfaction of truth spoken surpasses physical pain. You fulfilled the sage's role, revealing the meaning of your existence in the system. You were the necessary evil that made possible the illusion of society's virtue. This understanding is the culmination of this intellectual journey. The sage now falls silent. The word has been spoken, the meaning has been revealed. Only the final act of self-definition remains. It's time to use your determination to take the reins of your final destiny. Wisdom has been acquired, and now must be put into practice. It's the moment to prepare for the cure, which perhaps is not the cure of the flesh, but the cure of the soul through final action. The stage is set. You feel the weak and uneven pulse of your body, a machine that breaks silently, corroded by Samaritan root and herb juice and other dangerous treatments that used arsenic or mercury to combat venereal diseases. You remember that physical cure was a gamble, a bet with the danger that the remedy would do more harm than the disease itself. The healer awakens with certainty. The cure will not come from the flesh, but from the spirit, through final autonomy. You breathe a smell of aged paper and ink as you leaf through your documents, your belongings. You are one of the few who managed to accumulate some substantial wealth, a rarity in the fast life, where the myth of ascension was often refuted by early death. The shadow, the night, revealed the truth. The sage, the wisdom, processed it. Now, the healer must act. You feel the weight of the gold coins and jewels, the residue of the alchemy that tried to transform the filth of your social position into wealth. Gold cannot buy your health, nor the status they denied you from the beginning as a person of color in a white supremacy society. However, it can be used as an instrument of justice. You remember the young woman, perhaps indigenous or Creole, who arrived a few weeks ago, pushed into the lowest crib, excluded from civil rights, security, and the right to family. For indigenous women, the reality of land dispossession and violence placed them on the lowest rung of the race and class structure. You feel the heat of revolt. You walk slowly to the dressing table, where a small inlaid wooden box lies. You open it. Inside are the objects that define your career. Notes from rich clients, pieces of underwear that were once seductive, and money. You separate a generous amount, enough to take the young woman out of the crib and put her on a train, send her away from the hell on wheels. This is your act of charity, a counterpoint to exploitation. You feel a resolution that dispels the fear of death. The healer acts to restore the moral health of your community, the few companions in risk. You recall Minie Wallace Walkup, who, despite her profession, tried to define herself on her own terms, using what remained of her power. You don't want your name to be remembered only with a mixture of affection and moral contempt. You want it to be remembered for purpose. You breathe deeply, and the pain in your chest is mitigated by final courage. You remember Mike Shaw, the bully, the exploiter, perhaps a low-level pimp or violent client who haunts you, as happened with Ann Masters after the murder of her lover, John Peters. This man represents the uncontrolled violence of the frontier, which became law for the marginalized. You feel that revenge is a type of cure for the wound of injustice. You walk to the hiding place under the floorboards, where you keep your instrument of autonomous justice, a revolver or a dagger. You choose the dagger. It is cold and firm in your hand, an extension of your desire to break the cycle of exploitation that transformed your life into a constant transaction, where profound and lasting mutual esteem is mitigated by economic exchange and the difference in social power. You breathe. You are dressing for the final confrontation. Not with the expensive clothes of a fancy woman, but with the clothes that will allow maximum agility. You remember that, in the world of prostitution, the healer also needs to be the judge. The sage recognized social hypocrisy. Now, the healer will impose the justice of the desert. You feel the rough texture of the dagger's grip, and your mind is as clear as the mountain air that doctors recommended for tuberculosis treatment, although your disease is another. The search for the clean air of Colorado Springs and other sanatoriums symbolizes the search for purity. You are about to purify your own destiny. You walk to the gambling hall where the exploiter is. He is laughing, perhaps telling some joke about the disease or disgrace of a woman who was jettisoned as useless and idle. You feel your presence in the environment, a moment of quietude before the storm. The noise of faro and poker suddenly stops, as your determination crosses the saloon like lightning. You remember Lillian's pain in Kansas, whose disease was the justification for quarantine and forced sterilization in the name of the regulated morality of the progressive movement. You refuse to be a social disease, to be eliminated. You breathe. It's the last inhalation before action. You stop in front of the exploiter. The words exchanged are few, a reflection of what you learned from wisdom. Words are cheap. Action is the strongest currency. You accuse him of exploitation, not just of her, but of the fragility of the other women he used. You feel the dagger slide smoothly, a quick and fatal movement, an echo of the violence that was law on the frontier. There is no more time for fear. There is only the act of reparation. You are taking destiny into your own hands, just as Ann Masters stabbed Mike Shaw immediately after he killed her lover. You remember that this is the autonomous closure of the cycle. The healer does not cure the sick, but eliminates the source of moral disease, brutal and unpunished exploitation. You feel the cold floor beneath your knees, not from pain, but from exhaustion, as chaos ensues. There is no escape, no attempt to resist justice that will come from the community or the law, if there is any. You are exhausted, but free from fear. The healer has fulfilled her oath. You walk, or are taken, to the cold cell or to the silence. Your wealth, the gold that could not buy you a respectable life, will be used now. It will guarantee a decent coffin and a dignified burial, contrasting with the miserable and lonely death that was the common fate of most prostitutes. You breathe, and the silence is total. Liberation is complete. No longer a commodity, no longer a victim, but the author of your own ending. The healer has fulfilled her purpose. Minie's identity is integrated, complete in her tragedy and her determination. The light of the cell, or the pale light of a makeshift hospital room, now seems to accept your form. The turbulent world of the frontier recedes. The struggle has ended, and final acceptance descends upon you, soft as golden dust. It's the moment to rest, to merge with the vast and indifferent history of the West. The self is ready to integrate.